A woman kneels in a storm-battered chapel when a bloodied Hell's Angel crashes through the doors. He's broken, branded, and hiding something beneath a soaked cloth on his shoulder. She reaches to help, but he growls, "Don't take the cloth off." Days later, as they rebuild the old chapel together, she discovers the truth. What's under that cloth isn't just a scar, it's a mark of what hate did to him and what grace might heal. But when his past comes roaring back on the sound of engines and fire, the woman who saved him faces her own test of faith. Now, a man once called a monster must choose, stay the outlaw everyone fears, or become the proof that even the darkest soul can be redeemed. When the cloth finally comes off, will it reveal his pain or his salvation? Drop a comment below and share which part of the world you're tuning in from today. If you enjoy stories like this, don't forget to subscribe for more. The sky broke open above Eagle's Hollow that night. Rain came down in hard silver sheets, hammering the old chapel roof until it leaked through the wood and dripped on the pews below. Inside, Aisha Halloway worked alone, her sleeves rolled up, sanding the edges of the altar her uncle once built by hand. Her hands smelled of pine and paint thinner. The storm outside sounded like waves crashing against a shore, though the nearest ocean was hundreds of miles away. The chapel, with its cracked windows and faded cross, stood on the edge of a dirt road, forgotten by most who drove past. But not by her. She had come here for a reason. When her uncle passed away, he left her this chapel, a small building no bigger than a farmhouse. Everyone in town told her to sell it, that no one went to church anymore, that her life was back in the city. But Aisha wasn't after convenience. She was after peace. And maybe, she thought, if she could fix this place, she could fix herself too. The wind howled, blowing rain through a broken window pane. She reached for a towel to block it when a deep rumbling sound cut through the storm. A motorcycle engine. It grew louder, closer, then stopped right outside. Aisha froze. No one came out here this late, not in a storm like this. The next thing she heard was a loud bang on the chapel doors. Not a knock, but a heavy thud, as if someone had fallen against them. Her heart raced. She grabbed the hammer she'd been using, holding it in both hands as she stepped toward the entrance. The wind pushed against the door, rattling it in its hinges. Then she heard it. A groan. Without thinking, she yanked the doors open. There, under the flickering porch light, stood a man, or what looked like one. He was soaked from head to toe, blood dripping from his shoulder, a leather jacket torn and marked with a faint insignia she didn't recognize. His beard was rough, his eyes shadowed under the brim of a wet bandana. Before she could speak, he stumbled forward. She dropped the hammer and caught him by instinct, her small frame almost buckling under his weight. Hey, you're hurt," she said, lowering him to the floor. The man winced, clutching his arm. Don't touch the cloth," he muttered, voice hoarse. "What?" He turned his face slightly toward her, a flash of pain and something like fear in his eyes. "Don't take the cloth off." Then he slumped, unconscious. Aisha's breath caught in her throat. The man was heavy and smelled of motor oil and rain. She dragged him inside, laid him near the altar, and ran for the first aid kit. Her hands trembled as she unzipped it, glancing back at him. He was older than her by at least 10 years, built like a man used to fighting or working with his hands. His jacket was soaked, the leather cracked and scarred like the skin of a tree struck by lightning. On the back, faint letters showed through the mud. Hell's Angels. Aisha's stomach twisted. A biker. She looked toward the storm outside, half expecting more of them to show up. But the road was empty, just the sound of rain and wind. She knelt beside him again. "Okay," she whispered, more to herself than him. "I'll help you, but only if you don't die on me." She started cleaning the blood near his shoulder. The cloth he warned her about was soaked dark red. She reached for it, hesitated, then decided to respect his words. For now. Instead, she cleaned around it, wrapped another bandage over the wound, and prayed softly under her breath. After what felt like hours, the bleeding slowed. She covered him with a wool blanket from the chapel's pews and sat beside him, watching his chest rise and fall. Who was he? Outside, lightning flashed. For a second, she saw his face clearly, scarred, hardened, but peaceful in sleep. A man who'd seen too much, a man who'd lost too much. Aisha sighed. "What am I supposed to do with you?" she whispered. The night dragged on. Rain turned to a cold drizzle. She leaned against the pew, exhaustion finally taking her. When she woke again, morning light filtered through the cracked, stained glass, painting the chapel floor in broken colors. The stranger was gone. Panic shot through her. She stood quickly, knocking over a paint can. But then she saw him, sitting on the chapel steps outside, staring at the horizon, jacket still soaked. "You shouldn't be out there," she said softly, stepping into the doorway. He didn't turn around. "Didn't mean to trouble you." His voice was gravelly, quiet. "Didn't expect anyone to help?" "Well," she said, crossing her arms, "you nearly bled out on a church floor, so you don't get to play tough right now." That made him glance back, just slightly. There was a ghost of a smile in his eyes, the kind people forget how to use. She brought him coffee in a chipped mug. He nodded in thanks, but didn't drink right away. "What happened to your shoulder?" she asked gently. He stared at the cup for a long moment before saying, "You don't want to know." "I asked, didn't I?" He finally took a sip. "Got into some bad things, tried to get out. They didn't like that." "They?" He gave a half smirk. "People you pray about, not with." She frowned. "And you think God still cares about you?" He looked up, and for the first time she saw something crack in his face, like glass splitting under heat. "I don't think he should," he said quietly. Aisha felt the words cut through her chest. She knew that voice. She'd said something like that once too, years ago when she'd left her own life behind. She sat beside him. "Maybe he cares because you think he shouldn't." He didn't answer. Instead, he stood, wincing at the pain in his shoulder. "Thanks for the patch-up, church lady. I'll be gone before night." She followed him to the door. "At least tell me your name." He paused at the threshold. "Landon," he said finally. "Landon Danner." Then he walked into the gray morning, rain still whispering down. Aisha stood there, watching him go until he was a shadow against the road. Something about him, the brokenness, the silence, stayed with her. She didn't know if she'd see him again. But she knew one thing for certain. She had just let a man with hell in his eyes walk straight into the storm. And somehow, she wasn't afraid of him. She was afraid for him. That night, as she worked under the weak chapel lights, she glanced toward the road every few minutes. The storm had quieted. The air smelled like wet earth and pine. She looked up at the cross on the wall, cracked, faded, but still standing. "Lord," she whispered, "if you brought him here, don't let it be for nothing." A distant sound broke the silence, the low hum of a motorcycle engine fading into the hills. Aisha smiled faintly, her heart heavy, but full of something new. Hope. Morning came soft and gray, as if the storm had wrung the color from the sky. The mountains wore thin scarves of cloud, and the dirt road to the chapel held shallow pools that caught the weak light like bits of dull glass. Inside, Aisha boiled water on the old hot plate she kept on a folding table. The kettle clicked and hissed. The chapel smelled like damp wood, and her sleeves were dusted with fine white plaster. She had not slept much. After her prayer the night before, she had listened to the last rumble of the motorcycle fade, and a slow ache had settled in her chest. She told herself it was just worry. She told herself it would pass. But as she set out 2 chipped mugs, she knew she had poured a second cup out of hope, not habit. A shadow darkened the doorway. She turned. Landon stood there in the wet morning, jacket slung over one shoulder, hair dark and messy from the rain. He looked bigger by daylight. The lines on his face were clearer, the stubble like gray ash, and the set of his jaw still said, "Don't stand too close." But his eyes were softer than they had been last night. Tired, careful, but not hard. "You came back," she said, and tried to keep her voice calm, as if she had expected him all along. "Couldn't get the engine to run right." He lifted the jacket a little, as if that explained everything. "Thought I might fix it in your yard. Won't be long." "Coffee first," she said, and moved aside so he could come in out of the chill. He stepped in, stood a little to the left of the center aisle, and looked around like a man stepping into a memory he didn't want to see. His eyes went to the cracked windows, the faded hymn board, the low altar with its sanded edges. He took a slow breath and nodded towards the pews. "Place has good bones," he said. "So does a stubborn mule," Aisha answered, smiling a little. "Doesn't mean it's easy to fix." He almost smiled. She poured the coffee. He wrapped his big hands around the warm mug, but did not drink right away. His knuckles were scarred and nicked, the hands of a man who had worked and fought and built and broken in equal measure. "How's the shoulder?" she asked. "Fine." "That's not an answer." "It's the one I've got." "Sit," she said, with a little laugh that softened the edge. "I need to rewrap it. I won't take anything off without asking." He hesitated, then sat on the front pew, close to the aisle. The pew creaked under his weight. He kept his back straight, as if he didn't trust the wood or his own balance. She brought the first aid kit and knelt beside him. "May I?" she asked, nodding to the jacket he still held half over the shoulder. He let out a slow breath and set the jacket on the pew. The bandage from last night was damp at the edges. When she began to unwind it, she worked slow and gentle. He flinched at first, then forced himself to stillness. She cleaned the area around the soaked cloth he had warned her about, keeping her touch steady. "You're careful," he said at last. "Old habit," she said. "I learned the hard way that people hurt less if they feel seen." He watched her hands. "You talk like a nurse." "I talk like someone who wants people to stay alive." The last layer of fresh wrap slid into place. She taped it and smoothed it with her thumb. "You should keep that dry today." He nodded, still watching her hands as if they were telling him something he could not read. Then he looked away, focused on the window latch she had jammed a towel into last night. "You know that's not going to hold," he said. "I know." She tugged the towel with a sheepish face. "It's on my list." "You got a screwdriver?" "2, and neither is the right size," she said. He stood, set his coffee on the hymnal rack, and went to the window. "I'll make it the right size," he said, and rolled up his sleeve. As he moved, the fabric lifted higher than before, and for a split second she saw the edge of burned skin, the edge of that strange, terrible mark. Not a tattoo, not ink, a brand. He tugged the sleeve down quick, jaw tightening. She didn't reach, didn't stare. She only turned to the toolbox and brought him what he asked for. He set to work with steady, practiced motions. He pried the bent latch, shaved a splintered edge with a pocket knife, and tightened the screw until the loose metal kissed the frame like it was always meant to fit there. He tested the window twice, opened it, shut it, then opened it again to let the cool morning in. "You're good with your hands," she said. "Got by that way." He kept his eyes on the latch, not on her. "Did you learn from your dad?" He stilled. His hand on the latch went tight. For a long beat, he said nothing. Then, without looking at her, he said, "No." The word dropped like a small stone in a deep well. She let it fall. He closed the window and set the screwdriver on the sill. "You got a roof leak to fix?" he asked. "Smelled damp when I walked in." "3 of them," she said, "and a dozen other things." "Show me," he said. They climbed the narrow choir stairs to the low attic where the rafters showed. Dust floated up in thin slants of light. She pointed to the worst dark patch, where rain had made a long brown star on the ceiling. He studied it like a map. Then he showed her how to measure a shingle, how to cut it with a straight line, how to lay tar so it would not bubble when the sun came out. Under the roof's slope, their shoulders brushed once. He pulled back as if burned. She pretended not to notice and stayed a careful step away. By mid-morning, the cold had lifted. The mountains were blue and sharp in the distance. Landon pulled his bike onto the dry grass beside the chapel and lifted the seat, tools laid out in a neat row. Aisha dragged a peeling pew outside and sanded the armrest, the rasp making soft white curls of wood. She hummed an old hymn her uncle used to sing. It had no words for the first verse, just a simple rise and fall like breathing. 2 boys on bicycles rolled up, stopped a safe distance away, and watched Landon with big eyes. He didn't look up at first. When he did, they stared at the jacket, the boots, the hard shoulders. One boy whispered to the other. They half-turned their bikes like they might run. "You got chain trouble?" Landon asked, voice even, eyes back on his work. The Boulder boy cleared his throat. "Mine keeps skipping," he said. "Can't get it to stay." Landon wiped his hands on a rag and stood. He walked toward them slow, palms open and empty, like a man approaching a skittish animal. He squatted by the bike, checked the rear wheel, and tightened 2 small nuts with his fingers. "You ride the hill too hard, it loosens," he said. "Try it now." The boy pedaled a small circle. The chain held. His grin flashed like a match. "Thanks." Landon nodded once and went back to his tools. The boys looked to Aisha as if to ask if it was safe to smile, and she gave them a bright nod. They waved and rode off, calling thanks again that trailed like streamers. A truck rumbled down the road and slowed near the chapel. Sheriff Miles Thatcher leaned out the window, hat low, eyes steady. He had the worn look of a man who had stood watch too long and would keep standing, no matter what it cost his feet. "Mornin', Miss Halloway," he said. "Place is looking better already." "Morning, Sheriff," she called. "We're trying." His gaze slid to Landon, who pretended not to notice as he tightened a bolt under the seat. "You got help," Miles said, voice neutral. "Help showed up hurt," she said. "So we started with coffee and gauze." "Uh-huh." Miles drummed 2 fingers on the door. "He planning to stay?" "Just long enough to fix his bike," she said, "and a few sins of carpentry." Miles studied her, then Landon, then the mountain line. "Call if you need anything," he said at last. He tipped his hat and drove on, the truck's slow growl fading into the trees. Landon's shoulders were tight when the truck turned the bend. He didn't look up. "You should listen to him," he said. "I did," she said. "He said to call if I need anything. That's not what he meant. Maybe it should be, she said, and shook more dust from the pew. By noon, the sun cut through the clouds. Aisha set out 2 paper plates and split a sandwich, egg salad and crisp apple slices. They ate on the steps. Church bells rang faintly from somewhere far down the valley, a sound like glass and wind. "You live alone out here?" he asked after a while. "I do," she said. "That safe?" "It is today." He looked at her as if the answer surprised him, but he did not argue. She lifted her chin toward the old wooden cross at the back wall. "My uncle built that after the old one broke. He said, if you can build a cross, you can build anything, because you have to choose every cut with care." "Did you like him?" "I loved him," she said. "He made bad coffee and good choices. He also left me a long list of things to fix." "What's next on the list?" "The floor by the altar," she said. "Then the bell. Then the front steps. They sag when it rains." She nudged his boot with her shoe. "You already ate lunch, so you're hired." "I don't take pay," he said. "I pay in cookies." He checked her face for the joke. She held it steady. "I might make an exception," he said, and looked away before the corner of his mouth gave him away again. They worked through the warmest part of the day and into late afternoon. He patched the roof and checked the bell rope. She sanded pews and wiped the grit with a damp cloth that turned gray and then clean again. They did not talk about his jacket. They did not talk about the cloth he had begged her not to touch. But the silence between them was not empty. It was like a field just after rain, quiet, full, waiting. When clouds drifted back and the wind turned sharp, they carried the tools inside. The chapel's open door threw a square of pale light across the grass. Aisha stacked the sanding blocks and brushed her hair back with a dusty wrist. "Thank you," she said, "for the window, for the roof, for the bike boys, for not running." He stood with his jacket in his hands, eyes on the worn floorboards. "Don't thank me yet," he said. "You don't know me." "You fixed what was in front of you," she said. "That's enough for today." He took a breath like a man who had been holding it too long. Then he walked up the center aisle alone. He paused near the low altar, looked at the sanded edge, and set his jacket down as if it were heavier than leather had any right to be. He leaned one hand on the rail. For a long time, he didn't move. Then he lowered to one knee. It was not a showy motion. It was slow and careful, like a man kneeling in a tight space. He bowed his head. His wide back rose and fell. In the quiet, Aisha heard only the faint tick of the cooling roof and the soft rub of wind at the windows. She didn't move closer. She did not speak. She stood in the back and watched the shape of a prayer form in a man who clearly did not trust words. When he finally stood, there was a shine in his eyes. He tried to blink away. He picked up his jacket and turned, and that was when the sleeve slid again, just enough for the light to catch the edges of that burned cross. It was not the tidy symbol painted on church walls. It was crooked and harsh, stamped into skin by a hand that wanted to mark and own. She caught her breath without sound. He saw her see. His jaw went hard. He pulled the sleeve down in one rough jerk and waited, as if bracing for pity or fear or the quick lie people told when they did not know what else to do. She did not look away. She did not step closer either. She only nodded once, small and sure, as if he had shown her a scar and she had recognized it for what it was. Pain that had tried to define a life and failed. "Thank you for trusting me with the window," she said, choosing a smaller truth he could hold. For a heartbeat he stood there, caught between fight and flight. Then something eased in his shoulders. His mouth moved, not a smile, not yet, but something gentler than the set it had carried all day. "I'll be back in the morning," he said. "Bike'll go faster if I fix it with daylight." "Then I'll make better coffee," she said. "Doubtful," he said, and the word had the shape of a joke. He stepped into the doorway. Evening had come on soft and blue. The air smelled of rain and cut wood. He paused on the top step and looked out over the road. "Sorry, Dad," he whispered, so quiet she almost missed it. The words drifted into the falling light like ash. He put on his jacket and went down the steps. Aisha followed him to the door. "Be safe," she said. "Not likely," he answered, but he raised 2 fingers in a small, old salute, as if the wish mattered more than the odds. His motorcycle coughed, then caught. He rolled down the dirt road, not fast, not loud. She watched until he turned the bend, and the sound faded into the hush of evening. The chapel behind her glowed like a lantern, warm against the dark. She closed the door and leaned her back against it. Her palms were dusty. Her shoulders were tired. But a steady heat filled her chest, the kind that came from work done and kindness traded. She went to the altar and touched the smooth edge he had helped her sand. The wood felt like work and time, honest and plain. She thought of the brand on his shoulder, the way he had flinched, the way he had knelt anyway. She thought of the boys on their bikes and the sheriff's steady eyes and the broken latch made right. "Lord," she said, voice even, "if this is the road you want me to walk, I'll walk it. If this is the man you brought to my steps, I'll meet him there. Give me courage, give him peace, and give us both enough daylight to finish what we start." The room held her words like a promise. Outside, a single star slipped out of the cloud. She set the mugs in the small sink, wiped the table, and turned off the hot plate. Before she went to the caretaker's room to sleep, she opened the door once more and looked at the road. Empty, quiet, waiting. She smiled into the cool air. "Tomorrow, then?" she said. The door clicked shut. In the stillness, a drop of water fell from the patched roof, and then another, small and patient, like the start of a rhythm a life could learn to keep. The next morning dawned brighter, the storm clouds gone. The air smelled of wet soil and pine needles, and sunlight filtered through the broken windows of the chapel, painting soft streaks across the worn wooden floor. Aisha hummed to herself as she boiled water for coffee. Her muscles ached from the previous day's work, but it was the kind of ache that felt right. Earned. She glanced at the door every few minutes. Part of her doubted he'd return. Men like that, men who carried storms inside, usually didn't come back once the rain stopped. Still, she poured a second cup. The mug sat beside hers, waiting. By the time the clock above the altar ticked past 9, a low rumble echoed from down the dirt road. The sound grew until it filled the air. A motorcycle engine. Aisha stepped to the doorway and smiled before she even saw him. Landon parked his bike beside the chapel fence, the morning sun glinting off the chrome. He looked cleaner than the night she found him, but still rough around the edges. His beard caught the light, and his eyes, though still guarded, seemed less haunted. "You keep coming back," Aisha said, leaning against the doorframe. "Window held," he said with a shrug. "Guess I owe you another fix." Shirabusho laughed softly. "Coffee's inside. You can start with that." He followed her in, heavy boots echoing on the wooden floor. The chapel had begun to change. The air smelled of lemon oil from the polished pews, and the altar shone faintly with new varnish. Landon noticed every detail, though he said nothing. "You've been busy," he said finally. "I don't wait around," she replied, handing him a mug. He sat near the back pew. the same place he had knelt 2 nights before. "You shouldn't have to fix all this alone." "I'm not alone," she said softly. "I've got 2 hands, a toolbox, and God." He gave a short laugh, low and quiet. "You sound like my grandma. She said that once before they burned our house down." Aisha froze mid-sip. He waved it off, looking at the mug. "Old story. Doesn't matter." "It matters," she said gently. "You matter." That stopped him cold. He didn't look at her, but his jaw clenched as if fighting something. "You shouldn't say that. You don't even know who I am." She set her cup down and leaned forward on the pew in front of him. "I know what I see. A man trying to fix things. That's who you are today. That's enough for me." For a long moment, neither spoke. The quiet inside the chapel was almost tender, like 2 wounded souls holding still so the other could breathe. Then, outside, the sound of voices broke the calm. Aisha turned to see 2 older women from town, standing by the gate, whispering. They were dressed in neat church clothes, the kind who showed up to help only if there was gossip to spread afterward. "Morning, ladies," Aisha called with forced cheer. They smiled thinly. "We heard you've got company," one said. "That true?" Aisha didn't hesitate. "Yes, he's helping with repairs." Their eyes flicked toward Landon's bike, then toward the tattoos peeking from his sleeves. One of them murmured something about rough types. Landon straightened his back, jaw tightening, but stayed silent. Aisha stepped forward before they could speak again. "This chapel welcomes everyone," she said firmly, "especially those who need peace." The women exchanged looks, muttered polite farewells, and walked away. The air they left behind felt heavier somehow. Landon exhaled through his nose. "You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," she said. "You're helping me. That's what matters." He stared at her for a moment, then looked away, a faint smile tugging at his mouth. "You got guts, church lady." She grinned. "You've said that twice now. Keep count, and maybe I'll bake you something." That afternoon, they worked side by side in the yard. Landon fixed a broken fence post while Aisha painted the door. The smell of fresh paint mixed with the pine air. Every so often, they traded teasing remarks, light words that made the hard work easier. By the time the sun dipped low, turning the sky orange, and pink, the chapel looked brighter, almost alive again. Aisha sat on the steps, wiping sweat from her brow, while Landon leaned against his bike, arms folded. "Not bad," he said. "Almost looks like a real church now." "Almost?" she teased. He tilted his head toward the cross at the top. "It's missing something." "Faith." He looked away. "Maybe." The silence that followed was gentle but deep. The air cooled, and the sound of crickets began to hum through the dusk. "Why'd you really come back?" she asked after a while. Landon rubbed his hands on a rag. "Couldn't sleep. Thought about that storm, about how you didn't run." "I'm not scared of storms," she said. "Most people are scared of me," he replied quietly. She looked at him, her expression soft. "Maybe that's why you needed to come here. Maybe it's time you stop being afraid of yourself." He met her eyes for a heartbeat, then dropped his gaze. "You talk like you've done that before." She smiled sadly. "I have." The sun slipped behind the hills, leaving the world washed in gold and violet. Landon reached for his helmet. "I should go before it gets dark." "Will you come back tomorrow?" He hesitated. "You sure you want that?" "Yes," she said simply. "Tomorrow?" He studied her for a moment, as if weighing something heavy, then nodded. "Tomorrow, then." She watched him ride away, the bike's tail light glowing red like a fading ember. When he disappeared over the hill, she turned back toward the chapel. The building glowed faintly under the evening sky, patched, uneven, but standing strong. Inside, she poured the last of the coffee and sat alone in the front pew. The scent of paint hung in the air, sharp and clean. She bowed her head and whispered, "Lord, I don't know what you're doing, but I think he's supposed to be here." Her voice trembled, but she smiled through it. Outside, a cool wind swept through the valley, carrying with it the faint echo of an engine, soft, steady, and somehow comforting. That night, Aisha dreamed of the storm again, only this time the man in the rain didn't fall at her feet. He stood beside her, holding up a beam of light to guide her path. The next few days passed with a quiet rhythm. Mornings began with coffee, and sunlight pouring through the patched windows, followed by the sound of sanding, hammering, and laughter echoing off chapel walls that hadn't known joy in years. Aisha couldn't remember the last time she felt such peace. It wasn't just the satisfaction of progress. It was the steady company of someone who understood silence as deeply as she did. Landon had started showing up before sunrise. Some mornings, she'd find him sitting on the chapel steps, drinking coffee from a tin cup, his eyes distant as if searching the horizon for ghosts. He never said much about his past, but his presence alone spoke volumes. His hands worked with purpose, his shoulders relaxed more each day, and sometimes, when he thought she wasn't looking, he smiled. One warm afternoon, they worked side by side sanding pews inside the chapel. Dust floated through the shafts of sunlight like tiny flecks of gold. Aisha wiped her forehead and glanced at Landon, who had taken off his jacket, revealing a faded gray shirt clinging to his broad frame. "You've been at that same spot for 20 minutes, she teased. "That pew must be the smoothest piece of wood in Montana by now." He smirked. "Patience, church lady. Good work takes time." "I'll remember that next time you rush me," she said. He gave her a look that almost counted as playful. "You've got fire under that quiet voice. Someone has to balance out all your brooding." That made him laugh. A real one this time, deep and rough, like an engine turning over after years of rest. The sound made her chest warm. For a moment, everything felt normal, just two people fixing an old chapel under the summer light. No scars, no past, just work, laughter, and the soft hum of redemption. When the sun dipped lower, they stopped for water. Aisha sat on a pew, catching her breath, while Landon stood by the window, watching the sky change colors. "I ever tell you why I left the gang?" he asked suddenly. She looked up. "No, you didn't." He rubbed the back of his neck. "There was a kid, preacher's boy. Just a kid. They wanted to make an example of him, scare his father out of town. I stopped them, got him out before they could do what they planned." He paused, his jaw tightening. "That's when they came for me." Aisha's heart clenched. "They hurt you for saving someone?" He nodded. "Branded me like cattle. Said I'd wear their mark forever. Said no matter where I went, everyone would know I was one of them." Silence filled the room. Only the faint hum of the wind through the window broke it. Aisha set her water down and stood slowly. "You don't have to keep hiding it," she said softly. He stiffened. "You don't want to see it." "Maybe I need to." His eyes darkened, torn between fear and defiance. "It's ugly." "So is pain," she said gently. "But hiding it doesn't make it go away." For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, with a shaky breath, he reached for the cloth wrapped around his shoulder, the same one he'd warned her not to touch that first night. His fingers trembled as he began to unwind it. "Please don't take the cloth off," she whispered, her voice breaking. But he kept going. The last layer fell away. Aisha gasped. The skin beneath was a jagged cross burned deep into flesh, raw around the edges from years of reopening. It wasn't a mark of pride, it was punishment, cruelty carved into skin. Tears filled her eyes before she could stop them. Landon turned his face away. "Told you," he muttered. "It's not something anyone should look at." She took a step forward, slowly, carefully, until she stood beside him. "They meant it to shame you," she said softly. "But it's proof that you walked away, that you chose something better." He shook his head, voice cracking. "All it proves is that I belonged to something I can't erase." "No," she whispered, her hand trembling as she reached toward him. "It proves you survived it." When her fingers brushed his shoulder, he froze, not in fear, but in disbelief. No one had touched that scar in years. She rested her hand gently over the wound, the warmth of her palm steady. "You're still here," she said. "You're still standing." His eyes glistened. He took a slow breath, but the air came out shaky. And then, to her surprise, his face crumpled. He covered his eyes with his good hand and let out a sound halfway between a sob and a growl. His body shook as the tears came, quiet, broken, years too late. Aisha didn't speak. She just stayed beside him, her hand never leaving his shoulder. The chapel around them seemed to hold its breath, as if even the walls knew something sacred was happening. The sun dipped lower, its last rays spilling through the window, bathing them in gold. After a long while, Landon wiped his face, voice rough. "You shouldn't have to see me like this." "I think this is exactly how I was meant to see you," she said gently. "Not as the man people whisper about, but as the man God's still fighting for." He gave a short, broken laugh. "You really believe that?" "With everything I am." They stood in silence, side by side, as the sun set behind the hills. When the light faded, Aisha stepped back, her hand sliding away. "Come on," she said softly. "You can help me close up." He nodded, still quiet, but his shoulders looked lighter somehow, as if a piece of the burden had finally been set down. That night, after she locked the chapel doors, Aisha stayed behind to clean her brushes. Landon lingered by the steps, looking up at the night sky. The stars shimmered faintly through the fading twilight. He took a deep breath, the cool air filling his lungs. "You pray every night?" he asked when she joined him. "Mostly," she said. "It's not about fancy words, just talking to someone who listens." He thought for a moment. "Don't think he'd want to hear from me." "I think he already has," she said softly. "You just haven't realized it yet." He looked at her then. Really looked, and for the first time she saw something new in his eyes. Not fear, not guilt, hope, fragile, small, but alive. When he left that night, he didn't roar off into the dark. He drove slow, steady, his headlight cutting a soft line through the misty road. Aisha watched until the light disappeared, her heart both heavy and full. Inside the chapel, she walked to the altar and touched the place where they'd stood together, where he'd finally let the cloth fall, away. She whispered a prayer, not just for him, but for everyone carrying scars too deep to hide. And though the room was silent, she could almost hear a voice, low, steady, kind, whisper back, "He's coming home." By the fifth morning, word had spread. Eagles Hollow wasn't a big place. News moved quicker than a prairie fire, especially when it involved a man like Landon Danner. The Hell's Angel helping at the old chapel became the talk of every diner, gas station, and post office bench. Most stories were half true, and the rest weren't true at all. Aisha tried to ignore it. She focused on the work. The chapel had started to look different, less like an abandoned relic and more like a place where light could live again. The smell of sawdust and lemon oil filled the air. She painted the trim white while Landon fixed a loose board on the porch. They didn't speak much that morning, but the silence felt easy, comfortable. Then a pickup truck rolled up the dirt road, dust curling behind its tires. Sheriff Miles stepped out, hat low, boots creaking. His eyes swept the scene, stopping on Landon. "Morning," Aisha called, lowering her brush. "Morning," he said slowly. "Heard the storm brought a new kind of trouble to town." Landon wiped his hands on a rag, straightening to his full height. "If you're here for trouble, Sheriff, you're a day late." Miles didn't flinch. "Just making sure the lady's safe." "She's safer than me," Landon said dryly. Aisha stepped between them before tension could thicken. "He's been helping, Miles. Fixed the roof, the fence, and even the bell rope. The chapel's better for it." Miles's gaze lingered on Landon. "Helping's good. Staying out of fights is better." Landon's tone softened a little. "Not looking for any?" Miles tipped his hat toward Aisha. "Call me if that changes." Then he turned, boots crunching on the gravel as he headed back to his truck. When the sound of the engine faded, Aisha exhaled. "He means well," she said. "I'm sure he does," Landon replied, though his voice carried no bitterness, only weariness. "Men like him think people like me can't change. Then maybe it's time to prove them wrong." He gave her a small, crooked smile. "You always talk like hope's a job description." "Maybe it is," she said with a shrug. That afternoon, the townsfolk began to stop by. Some came with quiet curiosity, others with cautious hearts. Martha Green, the silver-haired widow who ran the bakery, arrived first carrying 2 baskets of biscuits. "Well, I'll be," she said, setting the baskets down. "Didn't think I'd live to see this chapel standing again." Aisha smiled. "It's coming along." Martha's gaze drifted to Landon, who was tightening a hinge on the front door. "And this must be the helper I've been hearing about." He straightened, wiping his brow. "Ma'am." She studied him with a look sharp enough to cut glass. "You're a big one," she said finally. "Eat biscuits?" His brow arched. "Yes, ma'am." "Good. You'll need them." She turned back to Aisha. "He's too thin for a man who works that hard." Landon blinked, almost smiling. "You run this town?" "Just the people who feed it," Martha said, patting his arm before walking off to fuss over Aisha. The tension broke like morning fog. By late afternoon, a few others had joined. Caleb and Ruth Jennings brought old hymnals, a teenage boy dropped off nails, and even the mechanic from town came to offer spare paint. Each time someone came, Aisha introduced Landon. At first, they avoided shaking his hand. By the end of the day, a few did. That evening, the two sat on the chapel steps eating Martha's biscuits with honey. The sun sank low, painting the fields gold. "Didn't think I'd see the day a whole town stopped glaring at me," Landon said. Aisha tore a biscuit in half. "They're starting to see what I see." He gave a quiet chuckle. "You sure you see clear?" She smiled. "Clear enough." He leaned back on his elbows, staring at the horizon. "You ever wonder why people forgive so easy? Or maybe why you do?" Aisha hesitated. "Because someone forgave me once, when I didn't deserve it." He turned his head toward her, eyes soft. "Who?" "My sister," she said quietly. "I left her behind when things got bad. Told myself I'd come back when I was stronger. I didn't." Landon didn't speak, but his silence wasn't cold. It was understanding. After a moment, he said, "Maybe fixing this place is how you go back for her." She looked at him, surprised. "And what about you?" He stared at the scar under his sleeve. "Maybe I'm trying to prove that one good choice still counts for something." They didn't need more words after that. The wind spoke for them. The whisper of grass, the creak of the chapel sign, the faint toll of the repaired bell. A few days later, Aisha woke early to find Landon already outside, helping 2 boys from town oil their rusty bicycles. He showed them how to adjust the chains, how to test the brakes. The boys listened wide-eyed, completely unafraid. "You've got away with kids," she said, watching from the porch. He shrugged. "They don't look at me like they've read my record." "Maybe that's the trick," she said. "See people how they are, not how they were." The smallest boy grinned at Landon. "Mister, you used to be in one of them biker gangs?" Landon's hand froze on the wrench. For a second, Aisha's stomach clenched. But then he nodded. "Used to. Now I'm fixing bikes instead of breaking them." The boys laughed, and the tension passed. When they rode off down the hill, shouting thanks, Aisha caught Landon smiling. "You handled that well," she said. "Didn't punch anybody," he said lightly. "That's progress." She laughed, shaking her head. By week's end, the chapel's transformation was undeniable. Fresh paint gleamed in the sun, the bell hung steady, and even the wildflowers along the path bloomed brighter. Folks who hadn't set foot inside in years stopped by to drop off donations or simply watch the 2 work. But not everyone was happy. Late one evening, after the last visitor left, a note appeared nailed to the chapel door. The paper was rough and stained, the handwriting jagged. "You can paint over sin, but you can't wash it off." Landon's face went still as stone when he saw it. He tore the note down, crumpled it, and shoved it into his pocket. "Who would do that?" Aisha asked, her voice shaking. "Someone who remembers me the way I was," he said quietly. "Or someone afraid of what you're becoming," she replied. He didn't answer. He just stood there, staring into the dark, jaw tight, as if waiting for the past to ride up that road and finish what it started. Aisha reached for his arm. "We've come too far to stop now." He looked down at her hand on his sleeve, then back at the chapel glowing in the moonlight. The tension in his shoulders eased a little. "You really believe this place can change people?" he asked. "I think it already is," she said softly. He nodded slowly, then turned toward the horizon where the hills met the stars. "Then I'll be here," he said. "Till it's done." That night, Aisha couldn't sleep. She sat by the window, the moonlight spilling across her sketchbook where she listed repairs. Outside, the faint glow of a campfire flickered near the chapel. Landon, keeping watch. She whispered a prayer under her breath. "Keep him steady, Lord. Don't let his past come knocking before he's ready." The wind outside shifted, rustling through the trees, almost like an answer. Morning light spilled through the new stained glass window, painting the chapel walls in hues of red and gold. Aisha stood by the altar, admiring how the colors danced across the floor like fire and sunrise meeting in the middle. Landon was on the ladder, setting the last pane in place. His hands moved steady, careful, as if each piece of glass carried more than light. It carried meaning. When he climbed down, she smiled. "Looks like redemption," she said. He wiped his hands on a rag, half smiling. Or maybe just decent craftsmanship. "You can call it what you want," she replied, "but it feels like something's changing." Landon didn't argue. He only looked at the floor where the light formed a cross across his boots and swallowed hard. The color reached his arm, the one with the scar, and for the first time, he didn't flinch. They spent the rest of the morning in quiet work. The sound of hammers and laughter drifted in from outside, where Caleb and Ruth Jennings were planting flowers along the chapel fence. The small town had started to believe again. Not just in God, but in miracles that came wearing leather jackets and old regrets. By afternoon, Aisha found Landon scrubbing the chapel floor, sleeves rolled up, sweat on his brow. The smell of pine soap filled the air. His jaw was set, but his eyes were far away, lost in a place she couldn't see. "Hey," she said softly, kneeling beside him. "You look like a man chasing ghosts." He didn't stop scrubbing. "Maybe I am. Want to tell me which ones?" He sighed, sitting back on his heels. "I did something a long time ago. Burned down a place. Thought I was doing right. Thought I was taking revenge for a friend they hurt. But there were people inside. Innocent people." Aisha's chest tightened. "And you've been carrying it ever since?" He nodded. "Every mile, every day. Can't wash that kind of thing off." She studied him quietly, then stood and motioned for him to follow. "Come with me." They walked behind the chapel to a small creek that ran cold and clear through the grass. Sunlight flickered across the rippling water, making it look alive. "Put your hands in," she said. He blinked. "What?" "Do it, not for religion, just for letting go." He hesitated, then knelt by the water and dipped his hands in. The creek ran cool against his skin, carrying away the dust, the grime, and something heavier he couldn't name. Aisha crouched beside him. "You can't fix what's gone," she said, "but you can choose what you build next." The water rippled between them, reflecting light over their faces. Landon's voice cracked. "How do you forgive yourself for something like that?" "You don't," she said softly. "You let God do it for you." For a long moment neither spoke. Only the sound of the creek filled the silence, gentle and steady. Then Landon lifted his hands, droplets falling like tiny diamonds. He stared at them as though seeing them new. "I ain't a churchman," he murmured. "Doesn't matter," she replied. "Faith isn't about where you kneel. It's about what you're willing to release." He gave a small, broken laugh. "You talk like you've done this before." "I have," she said. "Different ghosts. Same grace." He looked at her, really looked, and nodded once. "Then maybe this time, I'll try to believe it." They walked back to the chapel in silence, their footsteps soft on the grass. The sun was dipping low, coloring the sky in amber and rose. As they reached the door, Landon turned to her. "Thanks," he said quietly. "For what?" "For not walking away." She smiled, brushing dust from her skirt. "Someone once told me, when God sends a storm, he means to wash something clean." That night, when Aisha prayed by the window, she could still hear the creek outside, its steady murmur like a song. Somewhere down the road, a motorcycle engine started, then faded into the night. And for the first time since the storm that brought him to her. Door! She knew Landon wasn't running anymore. He was finally learning how to be still. The morning of the rededication dawned clear and golden, the kind of day that felt like a promise kept. The chapel stood proudly on the hill, fresh paint gleaming, the repaired bell catching sunlight, the scent of flowers drifting from Martha Green's baskets by the steps. For the first time in years, Eagles Hollow gathered as one. Aisha moved between the pews, straightening hymnals and setting out small candles. Her hands trembled, but not from fear, from gratitude. The townsfolk had shown up early, carrying casseroles, instruments, and smiles that reached their eyes. She caught sight of Landon near the doorway, dressed in a clean flannel shirt and jeans. His hair was combed back, his scar hidden under fabric, his hands restless but steady. "You ready?" she asked, stepping closer. "Not even a little," he said, half smiling. "That's good," she said. "Means it's real." He looked out over the crowd. Faces that once stared at him in suspicion now filled the chapel in quiet anticipation. The sheriff sat in the back. Martha and the Jennings couple shared a pew, whispering softly. Children fidgeted. The town pastor, a gentleman with kind eyes, stood by the pulpit and motioned for silence. "Today," the pastor began, "we rededicate not just a building, but ourselves. We remember that even broken wood can hold light again." Applause rippled softly through the room. Then the pastor turned to Landon. "Would you share your story, son?" The air shifted. Landon froze, color draining from his face. I'm no preacher," he murmured. Aisha reached for his hand, squeezing it gently. "Just speak your truth." He took a breath, walked to the front, and faced the crowd. For a moment, the room held its breath. "I don't deserve to be up here," he began. His voice was low but steady. "I did things I can't undo. I ran with people who believed fear was power, and when I tried to walk away, they made sure I'd remember." He paused, then slowly unbuttoned his sleeve. The fabric slipped back, revealing the scarred cross. Gasps filled the room. "This isn't what God did to me," he said hoarsely. "It's what hate did. But someone here," his eyes flicked toward Aisha, "reminded me that scars can mean survival, not shame." Silence stretched, thick with emotion. Then Martha stood, clapping once. Caleb joined her. Within seconds, the entire chapel followed. The sound rose like thunder, not out of pity, but out of pride. Landon blinked fast, unable to hide his tears. He looked at Aisha and mouthed, "Thank you." When the applause faded, the pastor lifted his hands. "Let this day be a new beginning, for all of us." The bell rang high above them, its clear tone carrying across the valley. Aisha smiled through her tears. Landon's shoulders eased, the weight of years slipping away. Outside, sunlight bathed the chapel in gold. For the first time, Landon Danner didn't hide his scar. He let it shine. The rededication joy still lingered in the air long after the townsfolk went home. The chapel smelled of wax and flowers, the pews glowing under soft lamplight. Aisha stood at the doorway, tired but deeply content. Landon was beside her, arms folded, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. "Never thought I'd see this place full," she said quietly. "Never thought I'd belong anywhere long enough to see it," he replied. They shared a small smile. For once, silence felt like peace, not distance. When Aisha finally went inside to gather candles, Landon lingered on the steps, gazing at the horizon. The night was calm. Too calm. He thought he heard the faint hum of motorcycles far off, but when he turned toward the sound, the road was empty. Still, an unease crawled up his spine. Aisha blew out the last candle and whispered a prayer of thanks. She didn't notice the faint smell of smoke until the next breath. Her eyes shot to the window. Orange light flickered outside. "Landon," she called, stepping towards the door. Before he could answer, fire burst along the chapel's side wall. Flames climbed fast, licking the paint, roaring like beasts released. "Get back," Landon shouted, grabbing a bucket near the steps. He tossed water, but it did little. The blaze spread too quickly. The air filled with smoke and sparks. "The bell rope," Aisha cried. "We can ring for help." Landon ran through the haze, coughing. He yanked the rope until the bell clanged wild and desperate across the valley. Then a beam cracked overhead, falling close enough to sear his arm. He stumbled, grabbing what he could. An old Bible, the wooden cross from the altar. Aisha covered her face, tears mixing with soot. "We have to get out." They burst through the door just as the roof gave a groan. Outside, townsfolk were already running up the hill, buckets in hand. The fire raged, unstoppable. When dawn came, the chapel was nothing but blackened beams and smoke. Landon stood among the ashes, his hands blistered, eyes hollow. "It's my fault," he whispered. "They found me." Aisha turned to him, voice steady through the heartbreak. "Then we rebuild, again." He looked at her, disbelief warring with awe. "You still believe?" She met his eyes. "I have to." The wind carried the smell of smoke and something else, hope, faint but alive. The fire left a hollow quiet over Eagle's Hollow. Where the chapel once stood, only smoke and ash remained. The air smelled of burnt wood and sorrow. Aisha stood among the ruins at sunrise, her dress streaked with soot, her hands blistered from carrying buckets all night. The bell lay cracked beside the rubble, its voice silenced. For 2 days, Landon didn't return. The townsfolk helped her sift through the wreckage. Caleb and Ruth brought blankets, Martha baked bread for the volunteers, and Sheriff Miles guarded the road in case the gang came back. Everyone spoke softly, as if afraid the loss might hear them. At night, when the others went home, Aisha stayed. She sat near the altar's remains, whispering prayers into the dark. She prayed for strength, for protection, and for Landon. Most of all, she prayed he wasn't blaming himself. On the 3rd morning, she woke to the sound of hammering. Outside, Caleb was clearing the scorched boards. "We're rebuilding," he said simply. "You started something good here, Miss Aisha. We're not letting it die." The words broke her composure. Tears slipped down her cheeks, not from grief this time, but from gratitude. Soon more people joined. Some brought nails, others food, some only their time. By noon, the ruins had become a work site filled with hope. Still, Landon was gone. Each night, Aisha lit a single candle in the chapel's remains, setting it where the altar used to stand. "You're forgiven," she whispered to the empty air. "Please come home." Sheriff Miles found her there one evening. "Heard he might have headed east," he said. "Bars, back roads, looks like he's running from himself again." Aisha's eyes didn't leave the candle flame. "Then I'll keep the light on until he stops." The sheriff nodded, hat in hand. "You got more faith than most preachers." "Maybe faith's easier when you've already lost everything," she said softly. That night, the wind swept through the half-built walls, carrying the scent of sawdust and rain. Aisha closed her eyes and whispered, "Lord, if he's out there, show him the way back." And somewhere far down a lonely road, a man rode through the dark, following the faintest glimmer of light on the horizon. Landon rode through the rain, the road stretching endlessly beneath his tires. The world blurred past in streaks of gray and water, but he couldn't outrun the image of the burning chapel, the look on Aisha's face, the sound of the bell collapsing. Every mile felt like punishment. Every breath a reminder that he'd brought the fire with him. He found a rundown bar at the edge of a forgotten town and parked outside. Inside, the air smelled of smoke and whiskey. Familiar faces turned when he entered. Hard men with leather vests, the ghosts of his old life. Reaper was among them, the same cruel smirk etched into his scarred face. "Well, look who crawled out of heaven," Reaper said. "Didn't think you'd be stupid enough to come back." "I didn't come to stay," Landon replied. "I came to end this." Reaper stood, circling him like a wolf. "And what? The club? The name? You can't erase blood, brother. I'm not your brother." The room went silent. Then, without warning, Reaper swung. The fight exploded fast, fists, chains, shouts. Landon took blows that rattled his bones but refused to fall. Years of guilt burned into strength. He fought like a man with something to live for. In the chaos, a voice cut through the noise. A young man's voice. "Stop!" Landon turned, dazed. The preacher's boy, the one he'd saved years ago, stood in the doorway, grown now but unmistakable. "Enough," he said. "You saved me once. Let me return it." Reaper laughed darkly. "You think you can save him? He's marked." The boy stepped forward, fearless. "No, he's forgiven." That single word, forgiven, hit Landon harder than any punch. He froze. Reaper lunged again, but the boy shoved him back. The gang hesitated, uncertain, the spell of violence breaking. Breathing hard, Landon dropped his fists. He looked at the boy, at his steady eyes. "You should have left," he rasped. "Then I'd be just like you were," the boy said, "running from Grace." Landon's knees buckled. He sank against the bar, shaking. For the first time, he didn't feel hate, only release. Outside, dawn broke through the clouds. Landon stepped into the pale light, bloodied but alive. He looked up at the sky and whispered, "If she's rebuilding, I will too." Then he climbed on his bike and turned toward home. 2 weeks passed before the sound of a motorcycle echoed up the hill again. The townsfolk paused their hammering as the figure came into view. Dusty, bruised, but alive. Aisha dropped her hammer and ran. Landon barely managed to swing his leg off the bike before she reached him. "I didn't think you'd come back," she whispered, breathless. "I didn't think anyone would still be here," he said, voice rough from the road. Her eyes filled with tears. "We never stopped building. We never stopped believing." He looked past her to the half-rebuilt chapel. The wooden beams stood strong against the morning light, and a new cross rose from the frame. His throat tightened. "You did all this?" "We did," she corrected gently. "You started it." He laughed softly, the sound breaking halfway into a sob. "I tried to fight the past," he said, "but I realized I was supposed to fight my way home." Aisha reached up, brushing the dirt from his cheek. "Then you're where you belong." He fell to his knees, trembling, and she knelt with him. Behind them, the workers stopped and watched silently as the two prayed amid the dust and sunlight. The bell rope swayed above them, catching the breeze. One soft chime rang through the valley, a sound of peace returning. For the first time since the fire, Landon smiled. "I'm home," he whispered. And Aisha, still holding his hand, whispered back, "Welcome home." The morning sun poured through the new stained glass windows, filling the chapel with golden light. The building stood proud again, its walls smooth, its bell shining, its air thick with peace. Townsfolk gathered quietly, whispering prayers of gratitude. Aisha stood near the altar, her heart swelling with joy. Months of tears and faith had brought them here. Then the doors opened, and Landon walked in. His shirt was clean, his scar half hidden but not concealed. For once, he didn't look like a man running from the world. He looked like a man walking toward grace. He joined her at the altar, and the pastor's voice carried softly. "Today we dedicate not just a chapel, but every heart that chose to rebuild." Aisha turned to Landon and reached for his hand. "You took the cloth off once to show your pain," she said, her voice trembling. "Now take it off to show you're healed." The chapel fell silent. Slowly, Landon unwrapped the bandage from his hand. When the final strip fell, the scar beneath gleamed faintly in the light, healed but never erased. He looked at Aisha, eyes wet. "Guess even the broken get another chance," he whispered. She smiled. "That's what grace means." He knelt beside her before the cross, head bowed. Outside, the bell rang, clear and strong. The sound rolled over the valley like a promise. Landon pressed his palm to his scar and whispered, "This time it doesn't hurt." Aisha's tears slipped free as she whispered back, "That's because it's holy now." Thank you for listening. Stories connect us in the most unexpected ways. If you felt that spark today, make sure you're subscribed. I share a new one daily, and the next might change your day.